Brief History of Taiwan, Republic of China, 1945 present.
World War II ended with the Japanese Empire relinquishing its hold on Taiwan, sparking a wave of hope for a new era. Under the authority of General MacArthur, Taiwan was transferred to the Republic of China, ROC, on October 25, 1945. The local population initially greeted the motherland with intense enthusiasm, celebrating what they believed was their liberation. But the arriving administration was weary from the Chinese Civil War and soon treated the island as a source for extraction. A cultural and economic friction quickly developed as expectations of a modern motherland clashed with reality. Systemic exclusion from government and the replacement of local networks with state monopolies fueled a deep-seated resentment. Food shortages emerged as the government seized resources to supply military campaigns across the strait. Hyperinflation and poor economic management soon turned the joy of return into a desperate struggle for survival. The phrase compared the disciplined but aggressive Japanese dogs to the perceived predatory and corrupt nationalist pigs. Post-war production plunged to a fraction of earlier levels, and living standards significantly dropped. Many who had supported the end of Japanese rule began to feel the island was being conquered by a new foreign power. By the beginning of 1947, the island was a tinderbox of ethnic tension and economic despair, waiting for a single spark. On the evening of February 27, 1947, a petty act of state violence against a street vendor ignited decades of trauma. The sight of the widow's blood became the catalyst for an island-wide explosion of pent-up rage against the regime. What began as a protest for economic justice rapidly transformed into a full-scale rebellion for autonomy and rights. The 228 incident saw the native Taiwanese rise up across the island, briefly taking control of many urban areas. The government's response was swift and merciless, using indiscriminate fire to instill fear and restore order. While local leaders sought dialogue, the provincial authorities used the negotiations as a tactic to buy time. Chiang Kai-shek authorized a massive military reinforcement to land and cleanse the island of dissidents. KMT troops initiated a violent crackdown, carrying out summary executions and horrific acts of brutality. An entire generation of intellectual and social leadership was systematically rounded up and executed. Scholars estimate that between 18,000 and 28,000 people were killed in the initial purge and subsequent military actions.
The 228 incident became a concealed history, a deep trauma that could not be spoken of for nearly 40 years. From the ashes of this rebellion, the long night of the White Terror began to descend, enforced by a heavy silence.
By 1949, the civil war on the mainland was lost, and Taiwan became the last stronghold of the Republic of China. Chiang established an authoritarian regime designed to secure the base for national recovery and eventual counterattack. To legitimize his centralization of power, Chiang vowed to reclaim the mainland, a goal that would dictate policy for decades. This repressive legal framework superseded the 1946 Constitution, granting the president nearly absolute power. Declared in 1949, this became the world's longest state of martial law, lasting 38 years and criminalizing all dissent. The White Terror targeted suspected communists and independence advocates, turning schools into sites of academic repression. The regime realized its survival depended on winning over the rural population and eliminating the power of old landlords. The 1949 Rent Reduction Act was the first step in a program that transformed the lives of millions of rural poor. This effectively shifted the focus of local elites from rural landholding to urban industrial investment. The Land to the Tiller program of 1953 turned tenants into productive owner cultivators, boosting agricultural output. Successful land reform provided the social stability and domestic savings necessary for the island's future industrialization. The seeds of the Taiwan miracle were planted, even as the regime maintained control through pervasive fear and monitoring. U.S. military and economic aid became the lifeblood of Taiwan's survival during the height of the Cold War. Guided by a cohort of planners, the state pivoted from mere survival to a strategy of rapid export-led development. In 1960, the regime launched reforms to liberalize trade, attract foreign investment, and stabilize the currency. Fiscal discipline and stable exchange rates laid the foundation for private sector expansion and entrepreneurship. Processing zones became the engines of a manufacturing revolution, transforming Taiwan into an industrial powerhouse. A flexible network of small and medium enterprises, SMEs, formed the resilient backbone of the burgeoning economy. Natural disasters tested the nation's infrastructure, yet the recovery was rapid, showcasing the island's growing resilience. Development came with Sinification. The regime suppressed local languages to build a Chinese national outlook. Under pressure from the U.S., Taiwan shifted from protecting domestic markets to promoting massive international exports. By the mid-1960s, Taiwan was transitioning from a poor post-colonial society to a rapidly growing Asian tiger. The island's growth rate began to outpace the world average, an achievement dubbed the economic miracle. A new middle class was emerging, one that would eventually demand political rights to match its economic status. In the heart of the White Terror, a few brave intellectuals dared to speak of true democracy and freedom. Founded in 1949, the magazine became a critical space for open commentary on the regime's authoritarianism. The regime forced the journal to shut down after it criticized Chiang Kai-shek's unconstitutional third term. His attempt to form an opposition coalition party led to 10 years of imprisonment for sedition. The state's paranoia reached absurd levels, seeking to erase even the written memories of its political prisoners. Intellectuals were imprisoned for the slightest perceived insult, such as a suspicious choice of words in a comic strip. Even future leaders were told their lives could be crushed as easily as an ant by the secret police. The Deng Wai, those outside the party, began to organize secretly as independent political actors. Internationally, the regime's legitimacy was crumbling as more countries recognized the People's Republic of China. When the Generalissimo died, he left behind an island that was economically wealthy but politically starved. A grand monument was built to his memory, even as the quiet revolution began to stir beneath the surface. His son and successor realized that survival now required a more populist image and a gradual phase-out of terror. In 1979, opposition leaders established a publication that also functioned as an unofficial political organization. The Deng Wai movement grew bolder, openly challenging the KMT's monopoly on power during the martial law era. This demonstration against political arrests was Taiwan's first planned civil movement in modern history. To mark International Human Rights Day, tens of thousands gathered for a massive rally in Kaohsiung. The battalion commander ordered his men to march and retreat repeatedly to cause panic and provoke the crowd. The Kaohsiung incident saw violent clashes between police and demonstrators as the government moved to suppress it. The regime arrested the core leadership, intending to use a mass trial to crush the opposition once and for all. A young team of defense lawyers rose to prominence, using the trial to articulate the need for democratic reform. Pressure from the US and global media forced the government to hold an unprecedented open trial to democracy. The Kaohsiung 8 received harsh sentences, but their courage galvanized the public's awareness of democracy. The trial became a watershed moment, shifting the movement's focus toward a distinct Taiwanese identity. Though the leadership was imprisoned, the movement they sparked was now unstoppable and irreversible. On the anniversary of the 228 incident, a gruesome massacre took the lives of activist Lin Yixiong's family. Despite being under strict state monitoring, a killer entered the home and committed a massacre while Lin was in prison. The tragedy shocked the nation's conscience and became a haunting reminder of the brutality of the era. The Carnegie Mellon professor died mysteriously after a 12-hour interrogation by the garrison command. While the state claimed it was an accident, independent investigations pointed to a calculated political murder. The regime's reach extended across the Pacific to silence critics living in the United States. The murder proved that the KMT was using criminal gangs to carry out acts of transnational state terror. A tape-recorded confession by a gang leader revealed that state authorities had directed the hit. These atrocities stripped the regime of its remaining legitimacy, forcing even hardliners to consider reform. Facing his own mortality, the president decided to end his father's era and begin political liberalization. Rather than ordering mass arrests, Chiang Ching-kuo allowed the new opposition party to exist. On July 15, 1987, the longest night ended as martial law was officially lifted after 38 years. Li's rise marked the start of the Quiet Revolution, a bloodless transition to a pluralistic democracy. The Wild Lily student movement demanded the full return of power to the people and the end of authoritarian rules. Rather than deploying tanks, Li Tenghui chose the path of dialogue and met with the student leaders. He accepted their demands, using the protest to dismantle the zombie institutions frozen since 1948. The 10,000-year parliament was finally retired, allowing for the first full re-election of the legislature. Constitutional revisions restored civil rights and paved the way for the island's first direct elections. Li fostered a new Taiwanese identity that emphasized the island's sovereignty and local culture. Pragmatic diplomacy allowed Taiwan to re-engage with the world, despite intense pressure from Beijing. He proclaimed that sovereignty belongs to the people, a statement that infuriated the PRC leadership. China responded with military tests, but the people were undaunted by the sword of Damocles. Over 10 million people cast their historic ballots, completing the island's full democratization. By 1996, the Republic of China, Taiwan, was reborn as a nation where sovereignty truly belongs to the people. Taiwan's most powerful defense was not forged in a bunker, but at a modest breakfast meeting. They decided that semiconductors would be the future, despite starting with zero technical base. Through technology transfer and tireless R&D, they began building a high-tech industry from scratch. The state-led ITRI became the incubator for a revolution that would change the global economy. Morris Chang revolutionized the industry by creating the pure-play foundry business model.
TSMC allowed global designers to manufacture cutting-edge chips without building their own massive plants. A highly skilled workforce became the island's most valuable resource in the information age. Even catastrophic natural disasters could not stop the island's momentum as a republic of computer. Taiwan became the indispensable node in the global supply chain for all modern electronic devices. This economic dominance created what analysts called a silicon shield against foreign aggression. The world, especially the US, could no longer afford for Taiwan to fall into hostile hands. Taiwan found a way to be too important to the global economy to be ignored or destroyed. The 2000 election marked the first peaceful transfer of power between parties in the island's modern history. Taiwan's democracy was proving to be a prime example of successful transformation from authoritarianism. The society became a pioneer in human rights, eventually becoming the first in Asia to legalize same-sex marriage. The China challenge remained the dominant fracture, with some seeking economic integration to thaw tensions. Civil society remained a powerful check on power, forcing military legal reform after a public injustice. When the government tried to fast-track a trade deal with China, a new generation of youth rose up. The Sunflower Student Movement occupied the parliament for 24 days to protest black box politics. It was a visceral rejection of secretive deals that many feared would erode the island's hard-won sovereignty. The sunflower became the emblem of a movement seeking light and accountability in government. The movement highlighted the growing divide over ties with China, particularly between younger and older generations. The occupation drew global attention and successfully forced a halt to the controversial trade agreement. The sunflowers proved that the power to determine the nation's direction truly belonged to its citizens. A new chapter began with the election of the first woman to hold the highest office in the country. Her administration sought to diversify the economy away from China by deepening ties with Southeast Asia. Taiwan continued to lead the region in human rights, earning its reputation as a beacon of democracy. Efficient pandemic management and mask diplomacy earned international praise and high scores for freedom. The sense of a distinct national identity was no longer a dream. It was the reality for the vast majority. The state promoted a distinct Taiwanese brand, reflecting the shifting public sentiment of its citizens. As the island's profile grew, so did the sharp power pressure and military posturing from the mainland. The two sides engaged in a dangerous game of chicken, with provocative moves heightening the risk of conflict. The 2024 election was a milestone, proving the maturity and resilience of the multi-party system. President Lai faced a divided government and an emboldened opposition coalition in the legislative yuan. The Bluebird movement utilized generative AI visuals and platforms like Threads to mobilize the youth. They protested to safeguard the checks and balances of their democracy against legislative overreach. By 2025, Taiwan embarked on democratic experiments rarely seen elsewhere, targeting over 30 legislators. Novelists and artists asserted that when cultural policy is threatened, recall becomes a civic duty. Despite political deadlock, the surreal growth of the tech sector continued to power the nation's resilience. Taiwan remained the indispensable Silicon Island, decoupling step by step from the mainland economy. Self-defense remained a top priority, with new indigenous vessels joining the fleet to face regional challenges. Transitional justice was finally uncovering the truths of the authoritarian past and memorializing its victims. For the first time, a free society was able to engage with, disagree about, and memorialize its massacres. The judiciary stood as the final check on power, even in the midst of a perfect constitutional storm. 30 years of popular votes proved that democracy in Taiwan was now mature and irreversible. A new generation, unburdened by the past but mindful of its lessons, was stepping onto the world stage. They understood that democracy was not a gift from heaven, but something that must be fought for every day. In the long arc of time, the spirit of the island remained awake, walking forward with its head held high.